Welcome back to Crime on the Clark Fork, the true crime podcast where I tell you about big crimes that happen in small places, with each case having occurred in areas with populations of 15,000 or less. My name is Mackenzie Spence, and I am your host. I'm excited that February is here, and that I am here to share another case with you. Today's case is going to be a two-parter, because by the time I was done writing this script, it was over 20 pages long, and that's just seems far too long for one podcast episode. So sorry, Mom. I know you would probably prefer me to read the entire thing and have it in one episode, but we're gonna split it between two episodes here. I did choose this case because I actually just finished listening to the audiobook that covers this case, and that goes way more in depth than I would ever be able to get to on this podcast. So when you're done listening to this episode, or even when you're done listening to this episode and the next episode, I would definitely recommend it to anyone who wants to dig a little bit deeper into this case and to get more firsthand accounts from this case as well. I listened to it on Spotify, but I'm sure you can find it any other place that you listen to audiobooks. The title of the book is If You Tell. Highly recommend. Absolutely insane, and you will understand once I start into this episode. And with that, I'm not going to delay any further. We will just hop right on in here. The sources for this episode are Wikipedia, Find a Grave, City of Raymond, Oxygen, FindLaw.com, The Historian, Como News, Seattle Post-Intelligencer, The Spokesman Review, Murderpedia, Chinook Observer, All That's Interesting, The Seattle Times, Short Form, If You Tell, The Daily Mail, and The Sun UK. Raymond, Washington, 1988. Population, 2,901. Raymond, Washington is a small town in North Pacific County, Washington, just 2 hours southwest of Seattle. The town is known for its access to the outdoors and local waterways, where you can easily get in a kayak or on a paddleboard and spend the day on the water, or bring your fishing pole and set up and fish for the day. A lot of the town's economy is based on lumber and fish, just like most other towns in this area of Washington. But for Nikki and Sammy Knotek, Raymond, Washington was not a place of awe and outdoor adventures. Their little farmhouse that was located on Monahan Landing Road was a place of nightmares. Their mother, Shelly, was physically and mentally abusive to the girls and their stepfather, David. David was also at Shelly's beck and call. Shelly controlled everything about the girls' lives, including when they could shower, when they could use the bathroom, or where they were allowed to sleep at night, which was often out on their front porch, locked out of the home. Shelly would oftentimes not let them shower for weeks at a time, and the girls recall that when they would hear their mom leave them alone on the property, they would quickly hop in the shower to clean themselves, and then make it look like they hadn't showered at all before their mom arrived back home. Shelly was born on April 15th, 1954, and grew up in the town of Raymond, Washington. She was the oldest sibling and the only girl of 3 children. Her and her brothers began growing up with their mother, who was an alcoholic and was pretty mentally ill. She was also known to be a sex worker in the area. When Shelly was 6 years old, her mother left her and her brothers, so the 3 went to live with their father, Les, and their stepmother, Laura. Shelly hated Laura, and would often tell her that she hated her. Shelly tormented her 2 younger brothers. She would pick fights and blame them for missing homework, And she would even put shards of glass in their shoes and in their boots, so when they would put them on, they would cut up the bottom of their feet. Shelly's mother eventually died when she was 13 years old, and her mother had been living with someone on Skid Row in LA, and she was beaten to death. But Shelly never asked or cared about what had happened to her mother. When Shelly was 14 years old, she went to her school and told her school teachers and principal that her father had raped her. She was taken in to the doctor, who performed an examination, which found that she had lied about the rape. Laura, her stepmother, later found a book in Shelly's room that had been dog-eared. The book's title was True Confessions, and on the front of the book, there was a headline in bold font that said, "I was raped at 15 by my dad," which is where Shelly got the idea to lie about this. After this lie, Laura and Les brought Shelly to multiple sessions with a psychologist, but Shelly never accepted fault and maintained that she had never done anything wrong. Shelly then moved into Laura's parents' home, but this change in scenery did not change her ways. She once again lied about abuse, but this time at the hands of her grandfather. She would also offer to babysit kids in their neighborhood, to only barricade them in their rooms once their parents left. Now, normally, I don't love covering the childhood of those that commit the crimes that I cover on this podcast, but for this one, I wanted to, because it shows that even from a very young age, Shelly was already a dangerous person to those around her. So, if Nikki or Sammy did something that Shelly did not like, she would use cruel and unusual punishment for her daughters, but especially Nikki, her oldest. One of the more common punishments that she would utilize was something that Shelly called wallowing. Wallowing required the girls to get completely naked and roll around outside in the dirt and mud in the middle of the night, while their father David sprayed them with cold water from the hose, and Shelly yelled at them from the sidelines. The treatment would last as long as Shelly saw fit, which could be 5 minutes or an hour. This would also be frequently coupled with the girls being locked in the chicken coop or in a dog cage that was full of dog poop. And for the girls, they often had no idea what they were being punished for, but it could have been something as small as making a face that their mother didn't like, or not drying the dishes correctly. At one point, Shelly shoved Nikki, her oldest daughter, through a glass door, which left cuts all over her body. She then blamed Nikki for what happened and said, "Look what you made me do," to her young daughter. Generally, after torturing and abusing her children, a flip would switch in Shelly, and she would immediately begin to shower them with affection in a way to ensure that she maintained her control over them. Shelly would also spend a lot of money on the girls' clothing, making sure that the appearance to the outside world was maintained so they would still be seen as the perfect family in Raymond. In 1988, Shelly's 13-year-old nephew, Shane, came to live with the family in Raymond. And this was just before Shelly and David's daughter, Tori, was born. Shane's mother was a drug addict from Alaska, and his father was always on the road in a motorcycle gang, and he was often in and out of prison. Shelly would often shower Shane in words of love, which he did not get from his parents, so when he was invited to live with them, he gratefully accepted. At this time, he had been living with his grandparents, Lester and Diana Watson, but when Shane got the invitation to move in with the Knoteks, his father agreed to let him go and live with them. At first, Shane was treated really well by Shelly and David, but it didn't take long for him to begin getting the same treatment that Sammy and Nikki often endured. There were multiple times where Shelly would make Nikki and Shane, who were roughly the same age, get naked and slow dance with each other in the living room while she watched. On other occasions, Shelly would make them strip naked and go to the hill behind their house and just sit there until she said their punishment was over and that they could return into the home. It also didn't matter how cold or hot it was outside. While the two girls had their own rooms in the upstairs portion of the house, Shane lived in the basement near the boiler, and Shelly would often take away his things, including his bed, as a punishment. Another form of punishment and torture that Shelly would use on Shane specifically was making him rub icy hot on his penis and then leave it there. So Shelly met David in 1982, and David claims that Shelly was the most beautiful woman he had ever seen. Before this, Shelly had been married twice before and had her two daughters, Nikki and Sammy, all before meeting David. The couple were married in 1987, and then in 1989, they had their first child together named Tori. This was just after Shane moved into the home. When David and Shelly met, David had recently finished his service with the Navy, and he was working construction jobs. It really didn't take long into their marriage before Shelly began verbally and physically abusing David, who was never really able to stand up to her. And since all of this has happened, Sammy has also mentioned to the media that while she loved her stepfather, he was a very weak man who never stood up to Shelly's abuse, both to him or to his stepdaughters. Not long after Shane moved into the Knotek house in 1988, another person moved in. A woman named Kathy Loreno. Kathy was a hairdresser, and in small towns, it's sometimes hard to get clients because a lot of the business that hairdressers in these types of towns get are their friends or are clients that they have had for a very long time and are very loyal to their hairdressers. Due to this, Kathy had a really hard time making ends meet, especially after she had a falling out with her mother because of her friendship with Shelly. Her mom did not like Shelly. Kathy was also in a new relationship, and her mother also did not like this person that she was dating either. So they had a falling out, and Kathy moved out of her mother's house. But in exchange for babysitting and helping with household chores, Kathy agreed to move into the Knotek house for free room and board. Kathy was known as someone who aimed to please others and was really kind to the children in the home. She was very non-confrontational and a rather quiet woman. At first, Shelly and Kathy got along really well, and Shelly would often love bomb Kathy. But shortly after moving into the Knotek home, the two young girls and Shane began to notice that Kathy seemed like she was being drugged, which they assumed was Shelly's doing because they had been given medication from Shelly that made them feel the same way that Kathy was acting. They came to find out that Shelly would drug Kathy, whether it was with muscle relaxers or tranquilizers or depression medications. They don't know exactly what she was getting or if it was a mixture of multiple different types of medication. And Shelly was also withholding food. Kathy quickly became hooked on that medication, which further solidified Shelly's hold on her. Now, the children did turn a blind eye to the abuse of Kathy that they were witnessing because they knew that if they helped Kathy or if they told on Shelly, they would get in trouble. And Kathy seemed to know this too. If Kathy was the one getting abused, then the kids were more safe from Shelly because she was not paying attention to them. To justify withholding the food, Shelly would often torment Kathy for her weight, stating that she was only trying to help Kathy lose weight and to be healthy. She would even plant food under Kathy's bed and then convince her that she was sleepwalking and eating everything in the house while she was doing it, which is why she wasn't losing weight. Shelly would often take out molded items from the pantry and fridge, blend them together, and then make Kathy drink the concoction, which would be her only source of nutrients that she would get for days at a time. Shelly would also move Kathy from living in the house to the pole barn on the property. She would lock her in the pole barn for days at a time before moving her back into the house, into the basement, or into the laundry room. At one point during this, she gave Kathy a full cup of salt and required her to eat all of it. Over the next 6 years, Kathy lost over 100 pounds and also lost most of her teeth. During this time, Shelly took everything that Kathy owned, stating that Kathy wasn't grateful enough for what Shelly was giving her. It went as far as Shelly taking all of Kathy's clothing. Shelly would then require Kathy to work completely naked in her yard, and when she wasn't sleeping in the pole barn, she would sleep in the basement next to the boiler that would leak fuel. If Shelly decided to bring Kathy anywhere with her, Shelly would make her ride in the trunk of the car. Also, during those 6 years, David would help Shelly torture Kathy, and Shelly would also make Shane partake in the torture so he wouldn't be subject to her wrath. Shelly eventually took away Kathy's showering privileges completely, so David and Shelly would waterboard Kathy or duct tape her legs and arm together, as well as putting duct tape over her mouth before pouring pure bleach into her open wounds. The last person to see Kathy alive, aside from the Knoteks, was a woman named Carolyn Barnum, who was a longtime friend of Kathy. Kathy had run away from the Knotek home and made it to Carolyn's home, asking if she could stay with her. Carolyn quickly said of course she could, and Kathy ended up staying there for 3 days. On that third day, the two went to the Aberdeen Mall together to help Kathy find a job. But unfortunately for Kathy, Shelly found them there. Shelly began yelling and screaming for Kathy to go back home with her, and the two got into a huge argument in the women's restroom, where they stayed for half an hour before emerging from the bathroom. When they finally came out, Kathy, who was visibly shaken and unwell, told Carolyn that she was just gonna go home with Shelly. In 1994, after not hearing from Kathy for some time, and after Shelly had fabricated a lie that Kathy had run away with the truck driver that she fell in love with, Kathy's mother reported her daughter missing. At that time, Kathy was actually still living with the Knoteks on the property, being constantly abused by Shelly. When Shelly was contacted by police about this missing persons report and Kathy's disappearance, She stuck with her story that Kathy had run away with her new boyfriend to California and had not been in contact with her. After the police were unable to gather any information on where Kathy's was, Kathy's brother hired a private investigator in an attempt to locate her. It didn't take long before the PI came back to her brother and told him that he believed Kathy had been killed in the Knotek home at the hands of Shelly. Now, unfortunately, this theory was true. Kathy died in 1994. By this time, she had lost all of her teeth, had lost most of her hair, was no longer able to walk or talk, was nearly blind, and half of her face drooped as if she had had a stroke. That one day in 1994, Shelly brutally beat Kathy to the point of unconsciousness, and then Kathy choked on her own vomit. David was actually at home when Kathy passed away, and he remembers hearing noises coming from their laundry room, which is where he found Kathy choking on her own vomit as her eyes rolled to the back of her head. David attempted to scoop the vomit out of her mouth, and he did perform CPR for about 5 minutes, but it was too little, too late. After Kathy passed, Shelly took the 3 girls to a hotel for a couple of nights to get away from the home. But unfortunately, during this time, David made Shane assist him in burning Kathy's body in their burn pile on the property. When the girls returned home, Shelly made Nikki, Shane, and Sammy dig through the ashes from the burn pile and remove any hard white plastic that was in there and put them in a jar. The children knew that what they were removing was not plastic, but rather the bones of the woman who had been living with them for the past 6 years. Years later, one of the girls found that jar full of bone fragments in the house, like Shelly was keeping them as a trophy. In February of 1995, a few months after Kathy died, Shane told Nikki that he had Polaroid photos of Kathy's wounds that he wanted to bring to the police. Nikki, who was rightfully fearful of her mother and what she would do if she didn't tell her and she found out that she knew, told Shelly about Shane's plans. Shelly found the photographs of Kathy's wounds hidden inside a stuffed teddy bear, which she promptly destroyed, as well as the photos, and beat Shane for having them. 2 weeks after that, Shane went missing. Shelly claimed that Shane had left her a beautiful birdhouse that he had made, and a note that said that he was going to go to Alaska to work on a fishing boat, and that he loved Shelly. The girls found it very odd because Shane had run away a couple of times in the past, and Shelly would get all of them into the car and look for him for hours until she was finally able to bring him home. But this time, they did not go out looking for Shane. And they also didn't believe that Shane would have ever left a note for their mother, especially one saying that he loved her, because he openly hated her and often talked about running away to get away from her and her abuse. When Shane's friends would call to ask where he was, Shelly would always tell them that he left to go work in Alaska. Shane's grandmother, Diana, would also often call and ask to speak to Shane, but Shelly would just tell her that he was not available and he was out with his friends, and that he was just a teenage boy. He was never home. Until one day, she told Diana that Shane had moved to Alaska to join a fishing boat. Now, this really didn't make sense to Diana because she knew that her grandson wanted to finish high school and he was so close. It was his senior year. It even got to the point where Shelly would make David take off days of work shortly after Shane's disappearance to look for him, and the girls really thought that their dad was just honestly trying to find where Shane had gone, but nothing ever came from his searches. Now, that is the end of the first part of this case. As always, if you could give me 5 stars on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, as well as a review on Apple Podcasts. I am always looking for cases to cover, so if you do have a case suggestion, please visit the link in the show's Instagram page at Crime on the Clark Fork. I also post pictures from the cases that I cover on my Instagram page, so if you want to go give that a quick follow and let me know what you think so far. I know I left kind of abruptly, but there is a reason for this. So I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll catch you next time with more big crime in small places.